Hello, and welcome to another episode of Sum of Our Parts, a podcast where two friends talk about the movies that add up to make us who we are. I'm Lindsay,
And I'm Jim.
and this week it was Jim's pick. Jim, why don't you tell us about what movie you had us watch?
Well, as we started last week, we're in football season, so I decided to continue the theme, and we have a movie that once again is based on a true story, like your selection was last week. This movie is very near and dear to my heart. It's very personal to me. Um, it's We Are Marshall, and it's the story of the Marshall football team and the crash and then the loss of the team and a lot of things, and then how the school dealt with it and the town and so on. So I thought it was fitting to it was the football theme, and then like I said, for this one it's very special to me. I I was I was there when all this happened, so and I still remember it very vividly, and in that season and the season after. So we've talked briefly before we started recording. You have seen the movie. You said you saw it in theaters with your dad.
Yeah, so this movie, it came out in 2006, so it came out when I was in high school, and I saw it with my dad, who I talked about before is a high school football coach, so we tend to see all the football movies. And I remember seeing this with my dad, and we sat near the front, and there was another coach that he knew with his family kind of to our right, like behind us, that he greeted when we came in. And I think they like didn't talk after because everyone was like sniffling and like drying their eyes because it is sad. It's so sad, right? Like it's a movie about football, but it's also a movie about like grief
Mm-hmm.
overall and like guilt and moving forward through that. So it was a heavy one. I was like, oh, and like going into the movie, I didn't know the story, so I was just like, oh my god, this is the saddest thing I've ever seen.
It is. And a lot of people, I think that when they see the movie, and I've talked to a lot of people who we because they found out that I grew up in Huntington. I was going to say, so that's why the movie's personal to me. I grew up in Huntington. I went to Marshall University. Not at that time. When I was this incident happened, I was 13 years old. So when the plane crash happened, but people talk about, oh, is that really true? Is it, is that, everybody? And I said, yeah, it was. It was the worst sports disaster in college history as far as loss of life. And I think it still is. You know, but yeah, it's not I won't say it's a feel good movie, although it does show how people, like you said, deal with grief and loss, and moving past that and trying to get through that. And this is a thing that's still a part of my hometown. It's remembered every year on November the 14th, the anniversary of the crash, and we'll get into that later on in the movie. But yeah, it's very moving, I think. And I'm when I talk to other people who just see the movie for what it is, and then I think that they're struck by how powerful it can be, or how much emotion that comes out into the movie. Of course, like I said, for me and all the people that I knew growing up, and my my family that were there, it was very personable, very personal to us, especially when the movie was being filmed and when it was released, because the premiere was held in Huntington, so
And they
at
did
the
some
old Keith Albee Theater. So
okay. And they did some filming in Huntington too. I know I read that
mm-hmm,
they filmed some of it like in Atlanta,
mm-hmm.
but because and you can recognize it like in those.
Right. I was good. There are scenes as you go through the movie. Like there's several scenes where there's scenes where, if well, you still won't see us, but there's some my family's in some of the extras in the movie, in the crowd scene outside of Old Main, where they are chanting, and then also when they're going to the first game. That's down Fraternity Row.
Everybody's walking down the street.
Walking, yeah, that's where all the fraternity houses were at. As a matter of fact, the house that's supposed to be Jack Linville's house is a fraternity house. So that when he comes out
That's
on the
funny.
porch, yeah. So, but and then at the cemetery where the memorial is, and then when they show the fountain and so on. So yeah.
Yeah. For you telling me that like that you spent time like at that fountain like when you
Oh
were
yeah, it
at
was right
Marshall.
outside the student union, and we used to sit
Mm-hmm.
there. It's if you ever see pictures of it, there's it's a huge sculpture, and then it's in the middle of a fountain, and around it is just like a little border thing where you can sit. No, I sat out there many an hour just to look, and then there's when they turn off the fountain on November the 14th of
Yeah, I remember
1970.
they said that in like the voiceover at the beginning, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think that Gator
Right.
said that. Well, before we talk about the movie, can you talk a little bit about your like what you remember from like when it happened?
Sure. It was because it was November the 14th, and we'd listened to the game on the radio.
Mm-hmm. They
And
played
my
East
dad,
Carolina, right? And they were
East
coming back.
Carolina, and we lost. Marshall
Mm-hmm.
lost.
Like last minute, and we see
Yeah, it
that at
was
the
just
beginning of the movie. They show like the sort of end of the
yeah.
game.
And Marshall didn't have a great season that year. It was in November, and we'd had a few games and stuff. So but I remember very distinctly the weather was bad. It was November, and it was raining. It was very overcast, and it was cool. It wasn't real cold that I remember, because I remember my dad and I were painting the baseboards in our living room. So we were doing that, and we actually heard the boom. We didn't live probably 20 miles from the airport. And my dad said something about it. He goes, I wonder what that was, because we thought first it was thunder. And I said something. I said, boy, that was a big boom or something like that. And Dad said, no, no, no. He goes, it's something worse. Well, the phone rang a little after that. So and then Dad answered the phone, of course, and then he said, there's been an accident out at the airport. He goes, they want people to come out and help look for, there was a plane crash. And so he left. He went. There was and they went out there, and I remember him coming home late. And I stayed up because it was a Saturday night, and I didn't have school. And then he just looked awful. It just he was wet. He was you could tell he was tired, and he was muddy. And I said, I remember I said, Dad, what happened? And he just said he just didn't want to talk about it. He said, and so, we found out that it was the Marshall. Well, we knew it was the Marshall football team because we were listening to the radio. But then, it was just for weeks and weeks after that, funerals everywhere. And it was all over the national news, of course. And, just there was people talking about how, awful it was, and how things that, what had happened and everything. And I just remember my dad being so upset. He knew a couple of the boosters, supporters of the football team. There were several prominent businessmen. The athletic director was on board that plane, all the coaching staff, and then most of the football team, as far as the starters. And Dad was a huge Marshall fan. We went to every home game, and it was just awful for the longest time. And then my brother-in-law, my not at that time, but he was dating my sister. He was at Marshall at that time, so I remember he was. We talked about, just what the atmosphere was on the campus and stuff. About just it was just nobody wanted to do anything, and it was just it was so sad. Just and every time you looked at the paper, there was all these death announcements. It was just pages and pages, because it was a small local paper, and of course, with all the people, and not everybody that was on the team was from Huntington, but there were a lot of memorial services, and just people trying to get together and support each other. So that's what I remember mostly is like I said, I still remember that night though, and Dad going out there and then coming home and just looking so I don't know, just washed out, I guess is the way to put it. So,
And for people who don't know, so there was, we mentioned, Marshall was playing in East Carolina. They chartered like a Southwest plane, basically,
mm-hmm.
fly home, and they crashed like they were home. Basically, they clipped trees,
Right.
And crashed in like a kind of gourd gully kind of thing, very short distance from where they were going to land.
Well, I was going to say,
Um,
if people don't, if the airport in Huntington is actually, it's the top of a small hill mountain or whatever, but it
mm-hmm,
was that it's been cut off flat.
mm-hmm.
And what had happened evidently was the pilots weren't familiar with the airport, and then they missed the runway and they hit the ground just below the runway. So they just plowed right into the face of the hill. So yeah, I was good, and we've flown into Huntington, and even Denise has talked about how scary it is coming in on that, because it looks like a postage stamp flying into that airport, even on a sunny, during the daytime.
Like you said, the weather was bad.
It was bad. It was rainy
Too.
and very overcast, and it's a tiny airport. It's a very small airport. So as a matter of fact, it wasn't until I think they were only landing prop planes there for the longest time, because the runway wasn't long enough to take jets, either takeoffs or landings. So
There were 75 people on the plane, so 37 players, 5 coaches, 2 athletic trainers, the athletic director, 25 boosters, and then 5 crew, and they all died.
yeah, there were no survivors.
So it's like a super, you know, horrible, like very sad and like tragic thing that happened. And so this movie, we kind of start with the plane crash comes at the beginning of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really about the sort of rebuilding and kind of what happens next from there. And I think it kind of speaks to, and we'll talk about this as we get through it, but sort of like when we talk about Remember the Titans, we did talk about like sports as like this venue for like coming together and like inspiration and stuff like that. And I think that is sort of what you see play out in this movie.
Agreed. And yeah, as we get through the movie, there's a lot of, as people would say, in the movie or during the movie, it was a lot more than just football. It was, the town lost everything. Huntington's a huge sports town anyway. Marshall is one of only 2 universities in the state of West Virginia, WVU being the other one. So, it's a matter of pride that we have the only other state university. So, and the town, supports the school in every way. So, and when this happened, like I said, it affected, the entire, probably, well, at least the entire city of Huntington, and then probably all of West Virginia as well. So,
You see both of like in the movie too that they do
mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah,
Shall we get going?
please.
So I will say the movie kind of at the beginning and end, there's a voiceover by a character named Annie Cantrell, who is, as far as I know, was not a real person. I think she's an invention for
She's
the
like an
movie.
amalgamation.
Yeah. So she's played by Kate Mara, who you might recognize from, she was on House of Cards, American Horror Story. She was in the more recent remake of Fantastic Four 24. She was on Pose. She was on the show as Teacher. She was in The Martian, Brokeback Mountain, etc. Also, she is, fun fact, part of the reason why she did this movie is because she's from a big football family. So, the Mara family on the Giants. Her other side of the family is the Rooneys, who own the Steelers. So she is a football legacy. I actually read on her Wikipedia page she missed like one of the Super Bowls that one of them was playing in. So now when she does movies, she gets that in her contract. If the Steelers or the Giants are in the Super Bowl, she gets off to go.
Oh, there you go.
So,
mm-hmm.
But yeah, so big football family. So I think that's part of the reason why she took a movie that's about football.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Well, and that she was one part of a big football dynasty, and that's one of the reasons she wanted to do the movie. So
yeah, not one but two on Dynasty.
I know, really, yeah. So,
I thought I grew up around football, but geez. He narrates sort of the beginning and end of the film with kind of the intro of sort of scene setting where we are. So he talks about the fountain, as we mentioned, and how every November 14th they turn it off in commemoration of this accident. So, as Jim said, it's November 14th, 1970. Marshall is playing at East Carolina. It's sort of coming down to the very last minute. Everybody's sort of on the edge of their seats. Unfortunately, Marshall comes up just short. I did comment here too, like it's so funny watching like older football movies because I'm like, these helmets, all of their brains are Swiss cheese. There's no protection. They have like, and then you have like the kickers with the one bar in the
or the
front.
quarterback with one
Yeah,
or none. Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
and even the lineman, it's barely anything.
Yeah.
So we also have we get also a little shot of, everybody's listening back in Huntington to the game. There's like the family, the announcer, they're listening, uh, wives, etc. You also get a shot of a gentleman named Jack Langle who's in Worcester, Ohio, listening to this. So we'll revisit him a little bit later. But they come up to short. Everybody's bummed, but it happens. They're getting ready to head back to Huntington. Um, I will also say that the university president talks to them and he says good night and go herd, which is funny because if you know who it is, it's David Strathairn, who also plays Edward R. Murrow in Good Night and Good Luck. So it did make me laugh when he said that uh, to the players. But and we sort of also get a sense of like some of these other people around the team. So the star running back is again is I don't think a real person, named Chris Griffin. And then his dad, Paul, is on the board of governors of the university. He clearly is like a well-known guy around town. He has his little booth at the diner that's for him and Chris that has their picture in it. Annie, who we mentioned is sort of narrating at the beginning, is the cheerleader. She's his girlfriend. He was there with them, cheering them on. Then there's some players that hadn't traveled with the team. You have Nate Ruffin, who was a real person,
Was a real player.
played by Anthony Mackie. He had a shoulder injury, so he's still back in Huntington. Another player named Tom Bogdan, who, yeah, he may have been a real person, I'm not sure. And then Reggie Oliver. So those three were back in Huntington, not with the team. We get a fun little moment when one of the players that was in East Carolina calls Reggie to ask him to pick up some beer for them to have when they get back. The coach comes up when he's saying, he's like, yes, Reggie, and then you just carry the two. Sounds like he's giving it like math advice, and the coach is like, yeah, okay. The coach, who is also a real person, Coach Tolley, he's
Rick
played
Tolley.
by Rick Tolley. Robert Patrick, who he's C-1000 from Terminator 2, but he's sort of like a bad guy in a lot of shows and movies. But he's uncredited because he's really only in it briefly. But yeah, so I think you get a sense very quickly, like a sense of the team too, and then some other little moments, like there's a coach, Red Fox, who's one of the assistant coaches. He's supposed to be on the plane, but another coach who has to go on a recruiting trip, and he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna miss my granddaughter's recital, I think, or
piano recital."
So, and he talks about missing a lot of like his kids' lives, and so Red is like, his name is Red Dawson. The actor is
Yeah.
Matthew Fox. I'm calling him Red Fox, like he's on
Oh well,
Sanford and
no,
Son.
it's a good combination.
Red
So,
Dawson. I mean, his name is Matthew Fox playing Red Dawson, not Red Fox. Sorry, that's giving a very different image. Red Dawson, he's like, you go get on the plane so you can get to your granddaughter, and I will do the recruiting trip. So he gets in the car to drive. The cheerleaders, Annie and the other cheerleaders, they're driving home. And then the players and the boosters and coaches, as we said, get on the plane. And everything's going fine. And then, you see on the plane, they don't show you the crash, but you see like the moment when it happens because everybody's kind of talking and da da da. And then all of a sudden there's like a jerk of the screen and then it cuts away.
Yeah, it just goes black.
Yeah. And then everybody else starts to hear phones start ringing. They start hearing things on the radio. You start seeing like the crawl at the bottom of the news. And everyone starts to, like, even at the movies, like, right, some of those other players were at the movies and they stopped the movie and a woman that worked there came up in the front to tell them what happened. And then you see kind of like what you were talking about, everybody starts going towards the crash site.
Right, the airport. So, which is, it's actually in a little, it's called the Huntington Airport, but it's right around, there's a little town called Cerrito Canova, West Virginia. But that's where it sits. Like I said, you go and snake your way up this little road, and it's at the top of the hill up there. We call it a hill. I think some people call it a little bit of a tiny mountain. So,
and you can see like the plane is in like a valley, like a gorge. So, and it's just completely destroyed, on fire. Just, it's gone. Like, and everyone's trying to figure out, like, is this their plane? And then, I think this may have been like dramatized for effect, but one of the firefighters comes to Paul Griffin and to Red Dawson's wife, who doesn't know. She was supposed to get a message that he was driving instead of on the plane. She hasn't been home to get that message. She went straight there because she was at the diner also. And a firefighter, brings them what appears is very clearly like a Marshall, like, playbook.
Playbook, yeah.
So it was obviously their plane. And immediately everybody is like devastated, right? Like, people are gathering at the church. You see Reggie had bought this specific beer he was out, and he's just carrying this case of beer around.
Fall City Beer had many of them when I was of drinking age, maybe a little before.
Perhaps. We listened to the Animal House episode, okay?
Yeah. So yeah.
But yeah, so he's just sort of like, it is, I think, one of those things. Anyone who's ever like lost somebody, and I think even in a small sense, right? If you lose one person, there is this period of like disbelief, and I think probably exponentially more so in a tragedy of this magnitude, right? So it's just like, clearly everybody's sort of wandering around in the sort of denial stage of grief, right? Of just like, oh my God. Red, Dawson's wife, is, she's laying in bed, like, weeping because she thinks that her husband is dead, when he pulls up and she goes outside and is like, even in disbelief, like, about that he's there in front of her. Obviously she like hugs him and is very happy to see him. But it's still just like a shock. And so then there's a memorial at the stadium. And you also see, lots of people were touched by this, obviously, like the announcer. He died. He was one of the people on the plane that died too. I imagine he was counted maybe as one of the boosters.
Gene Morehouse, he was the voice of Marshall. So that's what, he was the broadcaster. So
yeah, and you could tell his son was like obsessed, right? Because there was, at the beginning when they're playing the game, the mom is like, "Come on, like, it's time to eat dinner," and he's like, "No." He hides under the table to drag him out to go eat dinner. So he's just kind of also always around, like, very passionate about it too. And then there are funerals for the players after, and like you said, we see like a funeral for the guy Chris Griffin, because his dad and girlfriend are kind of like central characters to the movie, but clearly, like, there are tons of there's 75 people that died. So
Right. Yeah.
we see one funeral, but certainly this is one of dozens that are happening.
Interspersed in throughout the movie too, there's actual footage of some of the services, and then you see some of the you can tell by the type of film, and also of the recovery when they were bringing the bodies out on stretchers from the crash site, and so on. So there's a few clips of that. So
In terms of like the movie narrative, for, like I said, some of these fictional characters. So Paul Griffin, he's played by Ian McShane, who is also a British actor that's been in a million things. He's in the John Wick movies. He was on Deadwood, American Gods. He played Blackbeard in like one of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. So he's another person that you probably seen a lot of places. John Wick, I think, is probably the most recent thing he's always in. But you see during this funeral, his wife also died a few years ago. So Chris's mom. So he is like truly alone. But he's also like works at the steel mill. So he's a little stoic. And you can see that throughout the movie, that he sort of like tries to harden himself, I think. You can't like let him stiff upper lip kind of thing. That sort of.
Yeah, it was sort of that mentality of when now he's all alone, but he's not going to let people see that or be vulnerable. By the way, the steel mill where he works, that was a real place, and the exterior of that, because it's been shut down for years, is real. But they made railroad cars there, so it was called Hudai was the name of the plant. So, but that was a big during that time in the 70s. That was a big employer. That was one of the biggest factories and places where people worked at. So, and he was his character was supposed to be one of the like a supervisor there. So he had a very kind of a prestigious job. So
yeah, and you could see like he was one of those people that like he walked in the room, everybody knew him. They respected his opinion and stuff. And they talk about the steel mill, I think, at the beginning in that sort of intro when they're talking about Huntington and like, it being sort of part of the like skyline, sort of like on the Ohio. So, but yeah, so Paul Griffin tells the president of the university, David Strathairn, his name's Don. The president, Donald Deadman, is the president's name. Real person. So Paul tells him like they need to suspend the football program. Like it needs to not come back. It's just it's not a game anymore. It's just a reminder of what we've lost, and like the town can't handle it. And this they sort of have a parallel conversation a little bit later, but Paul is sort of acting as a spokesman for the town. I think later we'll see, if he's speaking for the town or is he.
I can say I remember this was a very hotly debated issue.
I'm sure.
At the time, and there were most of the people that we knew who were football fans and so on. We wanted football. Well, they wanted football back. But there was also, and then out of respect for the people that had been lost, their families, a lot of them did not want that because it was just a reminder of their loss. So, but it was in the papers all the time, sports pages, not just the sports pages either. It was on the front page. It was in the editorial pages, and it was like, should we bring, should Marshall, bring football back, or should Marshall continue, and that sort of thing. There was always something about it every day. I can just remember that being, debated. So
I think we see that like right away, because when the president tells the remaining players, of which there are like 4, that they're going to suspend the program, they're like, well, no, like we want to play. So the board of governors are having a meeting to vote on it. The players, students are not allowed in this meeting, but that doesn't stop them. They basically recruit like everyone they can to stand outside of this building, this university building, and Nate Ruff and Anthony Mackie sort of bust in on the meeting and tells them to look outside, and he sort of prompts this whole huge crowd of people to start the like "We are Marshall," which is like the cheer.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? It also reminds me of the Fox Sports. You know, it goes, "We
Mm-hmm.
are Fox Sports."
I never thought about that. Yeah, I think maybe they owe us some money. So
Maybe, yeah.
yeah, we probably
Someone
should
at
have.
Marshall needs to write them a letter.
Exactly. Yeah. Cease and desist. That's one of the shots though that is filmed in Huntington, because that's the
Mm-hmm.
one where I'm pretty sure my younger brother and my sister were in the extra shots, but that's outside of what we call Old Main,
Mm-hmm.
the first building on campus for Marshall. It used to be Marshall College, now Marshall University. So that was shot there.
Even among the players. So we said that this other player, Tom, had missed the plane. There's an interesting scene when Nate is sort of directing everyone to recruit people to join this crowd, and Tom's like, "Oh well, like what if people have concerns?" And he's sort of doing the like, "Well, I have a friend who has it's him, like he has
Mm-hmm.
concerns," and you can see because he's not in this crowd.
Yeah.
Um, so he has a lot of you know feelings about it. I think this is also we see all these individual people sort of process their different complicated feelings about it. Um, Back to Annie and Paul. Annie works at the diner that Paul's always at. He still goes to that booth that has a picture of him and Chris like every day. He tries to give back. Chris had proposed to her with his late mother's ring, and she tries to give that back to Paul. But he tells her to keep it and keep thinking of Chris whenever she looks at it. After that demonstration, though, they're gonna keep the football program going, but the president has to find a coaching staff because the entire coaching staff died. Most of the team is gone. Like they have to sort of build this from nothing almost.
Right. Yeah. The athletic director that it
Right.
was there, and
Yeah. All the people like boosters who would like help fundraise. So it's like they have really like nothing. And Red Dawson, who's the remaining coach, he wants nothing to do with it
mm-hmm.
right now. So you see President Debman, he's making calls and he's just getting a lot of no's. And then finally, Jack Langle, who we met briefly earlier, he's played by Matthew McConaughey. You know who Matthew McConaughey is. Uh, I don't need to tell you what he's been in, but Matthew McConaughey. I like was watching this movie and then I kept seeing commercials with him in it. I think for like stand up cancer or something, and then
I
like
thought
Lincoln and stuff like that.
I thought it was like the stealing of data or whatever, where he plays the Western character and
Oh yeah. Well, see, that's the thing. He's in like 12 commercials, so I know
mm-hmm.
you know who Matthew McConaughey is.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
if you
all
think of all right, all right,
all
all
right, all
right,
right.
there you go. Dazed and Confused, Magic Mike, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, Wolf of Wall Street, etc. Uh, so he plays Jack Langle. He comes to them. He's like, I want to be your coach. The president goes to visit him, and he's like, okay, like what is the catch here, kind of thing, because everybody else has been saying no, and Jack Langle is like very enthusiastic. He's like a lot, and the president is like, okay, like why do you want to do this? And he basically says like, I saw what happened, and I feel like maybe I could help. So his heart's in the right place. I think when he gets there, it becomes evident that maybe he's in over his head a little bit.
So can I interject just a little bit of
Yes,
trivia?
please do. Please do.
So fact, he wasn't the first coach hired.
Mm.
They hired an assistant coach from Georgia Tech to be the head coach. He stayed for 2 days and then left. And then
Mm-hmm.
because well, I don't know why. It just said he left, but possibly because he felt it was too daunting of a task. So then they made Red Dawson acting coach until they could fill the position, and then they hired Jack. So, but Red had stepped up and had already started recruiting, and then when they hired Jack, but they sort of took a little bit of a dramatic license with Lingle being the first one or the only one. So there was in real life. but just for 2 days. So I don't even know if that counts.
Plays it like this is not an easy task to take
Oh,
on. And I
sure.
think so. Jack gets to Huntington. He's hired. They introduce him to the local media, and like he like doesn't have really great answers to the questions they're asked. So they're kind of like, the town has been devastated. Like, what are you gonna do? And he's like, I'm a football coach.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like he does. He has some idea that like it is just about football, and doesn't really appreciate the full scope of the situation.
The one of the guys that keeps pressing him about the questions, Ernie Salvatore, he was a real writer for the newspaper, so that's a real character. So
Oh, nice.
yeah, who was a friend of my dad's actually. So dad knew him, and so
Well, that's cool.
yeah, Ernie stayed on for a long time. He hung around for a long time. Wrote a lot of articles in the sports page.
Kind of first step at this time, true freshmen could not play on the varsity team. That was an NCAA rule, which I appreciate that President Dedman calls NC2A. Like no one says that, but he says it, NC2A. And so Jack Lengel's like, okay, well, you got to petition them to let us play freshmen because it's just. And he is writing letter after letter after letter and getting a lot of no's. And eventually, this is a little bit later, but Jack Lengel is like, you got to go. You know how you came to see me in person? You got to show up in person.
Uh-huh.
So he sends him to like, I don't know if it was still, it's like in Indiana or something is where
yeah, it's somewhere in the Midwest. I can't remember where NCAA headquarters.
I feel like it's like Indiana, but I don't remember
I
for
think
sure.
you're
But
right. It
he
was
shows
wet.
him, yeah, he has to go to wherever the NCAA, and I don't know if it was also there in 1971, but he's there, and eventually the petition is granted once he presents in person. So never give up, folks. Just show up somewhere in the rain, and maybe people will say yes.
By the way, this was groundbreaking. It allowed all schools in 1972 then to play freshmen in any sport at any school. So, but this was the first. So, and then they did it supposedly because of the success Marshall had with it in allowing freshmen to play on a varsity team. So,
I wonder what the rationale was before for not letting them before that.
I honestly don't know. I don't know whether it was because they were, they needed to break him in, or that I have no idea. But I do remember that was a big deal. That when we finally got permission to start freshmen, and then like I said, then the next year, then it opened it up to all schools, to all sports, not just football, and not just schools that they accepted Marshall because of the circumstances, but
Right.
then like I said, then after that though, they just opened it up regardless. So,
Yeah.
and
This makes me think of Sunshine's dad in Remember the Titans. 18-year-olds could go to war, but they can't play varsity football. We'll send you to Vietnam,
yeah,
but you
well,
can't play on the varsity football. I mean,
you
obviously
can't start.
you can't start.
Yeah, you can't start. Yeah,
Yeah.
you could be the freshman because they had freshmen on the team, but they couldn't start.
Oh yeah.
They
Well, have fun in South Vietnam, but no starting on the
mm-hmm.
football team. Okay.
Exactly. And once again, we're in 1970, right in the middle of the Vietnam War.
Exactly. So, uh, anyways, so that's an obstacle that they do thankfully eventually overcome because, like I said, the team has 3 people right now. It's Reggie, it's Nate, and there's one other guy. And then there's Tom, but Tom is not playing.
Tom's not coming back.
So the mission now is to sort of build a coaching staff and then a team. So Jack Langle starts with Red Dawson, who has again said he's not doing it. He's devoting his entire time to like building sheds now. They make a joke about it, and I think someone says to his wife Carol, like, let him build a shed. Like
the president, yeah, he
the
says
president,
let him build
yeah.
100 sheds. So
yeah. So he's up on the roof of his shed, like hammering some 1x6s, not 1x5s, 1x6s. When Jack Lengle shows up and invites himself also onto the roof, So again, you get this sense of a very enthusiastic person who maybe like can't read the room.
Mm-hmm.
He's very persistent. And so basically Red says that his kind of main issue is that he did a lot of recruiting, right? He recruited like 20, I think he says, of those guys that were on the plane.
Mm-hmm.
And when he recruited them, he told their mothers, I'm gonna take care of your son, right? I'm
Right.
gonna keep him safe. And he said I can't like go like lie to people like that anymore. Um, he just doesn't think he can do it. So he's feeling a lot of guilt. And obviously, I'm sure he thought he was doing a nice thing by giving up his seat on the plane for the other coach, but he you know signed his death warrant
Well,
unknowingly.
basically, yeah, he got him killed. So
Yeah. So,
inadvertently, but I'm
right.
sure that's how he
Obviously,
felt.
exactly. Like if I would have just stayed on that plane, he would be alive and he would have missed his granddaughter's recital, but he could go see the next one. And now he can't go to any. So obviously, Red is dealing with a lot of guilt. And Jack, I think he just tries to, his vibe is very like positive. He's in a sort of like golden retriever kind of way, right? Like over
That's a good
enthusiastic,
description.
positive. And so I think he just puts it out to him like, I think we basically have a chance to like do something here
Mm-hmm.
is sort of his vibe. Meanwhile, Nate is trying to get Tom to get back on the team. So like, this is our team, we need you. And Tom is also struggling with guilt because he's like, I could have been on that plane. The only reason he wasn't at that game is because he overslept and he missed the trip down there. He missed the plane down there. Um, so had he not done that, he would have been on the plane. So he's really struggling with like guilt about that. Even though he was on the plane, everybody else still would have died. He just also would have died.
Right.
But I guess he's like, I should have died too. Like,
And I'm sure in your in your professional experience, survivor's guilt is a real thing, and
yeah, yeah,
people unfortunately deal with that in tough ways. So
right, right. And certainly it's not like it's not
no,
rational,
no, but
right?
it's
He's he's doing that. Everybody's sort of trying their thing. Annie is, as we said, she was the cheerleader, the girlfriend of the running back who died. She's trying to connect with his dad, Paul, who again is just very like stoic, pushing people away, like cold, standoffish, like no. Meanwhile, she's just like, I don't know, falling apart at the diner. But she's crying. Uh, and then things start to turn around a little bit. Red comes back to Jack and says, I will give you 1 year. Which, you know, spoiler, he stuck to that.
kept his word.
He kept his word. He gave him 1 year. And they start to build a staff. So they have a coaching staff. And then it's time to recruit. And the problem here, Jim, you mentioned the other state university, West Virginia University. Everywhere they show up to try to recruit somebody, WVU's already there.
Right there, baby. And of course, WVU, those of you don't know, is a bigger school. It was
Mm-hmm.
it was the first university in the state of West Virginia. It was and state funded and had has all the accolades. They were the more attendance, more money, more prestige, more publicity. So, and at the time, their football coach was Bobby Bowden,
Yeah, who
who,
we meet uh in a little bit.
but
Fun fact, which I realized, I was like, that guy looks familiar. You know who he was the cop in Remember the Titans? Remember when Julius is going to Gary's house and the cop talks to him?
is that him?
Yeah, it's the same guy. And I was like, he looks so familiar. And then I looked at his Wikipedia and
Oh,
it's the same actor. So back to back movies with
there
some
you
some
go.
overlap
All
there.
right. All right.
But yeah, so they're struggling. Eventually we do again get the appeal. First of all, also here I noted the classic code sort. We got a lot of code sort.
Now these though have the belt. Have you noticed
Yes,
these are not the snaps, with no
yes.
belt. These
These
have
are
the
like
belt.
and they're like khaki colored. They're either
Yeah,
wearing khakis or khaki coat shorts,
right.
like that tan coat shorts. But and this is the same around the same time as, because remember the Titans
Exactly.
take place in 71 also. So
Right. So this is a
we're
year earlier. So the
yes.
Titans just graduated to the no belt look. So
Yes. Yes. Maybe they're on the East Coast. So they're a little more
well,
cosmopolitan.
there you go. So
But yeah, so they're granted the waiver and they're like, we gotta get creative
mhm.
with our recruitment. So they're like, here's what we're gonna do. They start recruiting. It basically poach people from other sports at Marshall. Right? There's a guy that plays basketball that's a giant and is just knocking people over, right? There's a dude who, when he's running home in baseball, he plows over the catcher. There's a guy on the soccer team who's kicking for soccer terribly, but good for football. Like
Evidently,
he's
yeah.
sending the ball over the goal, and it's like, well, that's not the object in soccer. Get your head over the ball is what I would say if I was coaching him in soccer. But if you lean back, your foot goes up, the ball goes up. You gotta head over the ball, keep it down. But they realized his issues in soccer would be good for them in football. So we also get some classic 70s music. We get Peace Train by Cat Stevens, which
Mm.
we did not mention as a classic 70s soundtrack song, but I do think it's another one with like the CCR and
The Hollies.
the Hollies. Yeah, like I think
Cool,
this,
long, cool woman in a black dress.
yeah,
Yeah. Cat Stevens' Peace Train is, I think, a standard for the '70s
yeah.
vibe.
I think if you, again, these are like the songs. If you want a
Mm.
montage and you want to communicate to us that it's the 70s, these are the songs you can play.
Exactly.
It takes you there instantly. And it's still, people are still struggling, right? We see Reggie, he still has that Fall City beer
Oh
in his
yeah.
room, untouched. Tom is still lingering on the edge, kind of, and the son of the announcer, he's like, oh, he's excited, because this is like
Hmm.
clearly like Marshall football was kind of like his dad's life and something that he got into because of his dad. Um, and so when he sees Tom, he's like, oh, Tom, are you gonna play? And Tom just like can't handle it and walks away. So they have a team, and now they start practicing, and it is struggle city
Oh,
out there.
it's not pretty.
It's
So
bad. It's the little giant over there. Like
that's a good way to put it.
their O
Um,
line is not good. Like the coaches in their coaching outfits block better than the entire O line.
with um, I remember when I was watching that and at some of the scenes, and they were talking about how they're how they had to make some changes because the offensive line was not looking very good, and they said, and it's not because our defense is that great.
Great defensive line that's making the O line look really bad. And then it's also like they don't know their names. Jack Langle
and
doesn't know anyone's names. They have to put their name to tape on their
well,
helmet
and
to be like,
plus some of the players don't even know football. They
yeah,
don't
they
even
play
know
other
what it
sports.
means. Yeah. What Because he was trying to tell the basketball player what the post route meant and what the
Mm-hmm.
flag route meant. Like you
Yeah,
gotta, yeah,
these
10
are not
yards.
things you worry about in basketball.
Exactly. So but I also I had read that when they did start recruiting, there were some veterans, service veterans that had
Mm.
gone out for the team, who were going to school on the GI Bill. So,
Oh, nice.
and I can speak to that from experience. I started Marshall in '76, and I went to school in my fraternity and so on with a lot of guys who had been in the service and had been to Vietnam and were going to school on the GI Bill. So, here, I was 18, 19 years old, and these guys were 21, 22, 23. And then, these guys had scars and tattoos and all kinds of, used drugs. But, but evidently there were some veterans who had played ball in high school and then come back, gone to Marshall, and then now they wanted to try out for the club. So evidently a couple of them had made the team as well. So,
And a good group to
yeah,
draw from.
yeah. Weren't afraid of
Uh,
anything, probably.
definitely not. So, well, they decided to change the offense because obviously what they're doing, he wanted to power I was uh, Jack Langle's preferred system, and that required a functional offensive line. So they're like, okay, let's change to we'll run veer. And well, wouldn't you know, the only other school that runs veer is good old West Virginia University.
Outside of Texas, nobody else runs it better. So
Yes.
that's
So,
that, Bobby is the king of veer.
and again, because Jack Langle has a level of optimism that blinds him from real life. He's like, okay, well, let's just go ask them. Red Dawson is like, they're like our biggest rival. We're just gonna go ask them to see film. And he's like, yeah,
Yeah,
what do you
Morgantown.
He's like, let's go.
Road
He's like,
trip.
or he says like you're gonna just ask them for their film and to get us lunch, and he's like, well, they don't have to give us lunch.
We'll pick up something on the way.
Yeah, so, which I think in some ways maybe we all need to be a little bit more like Jack Langle, like nothing ventured, nothing gained, right?
Exactly. You don't know until you ask.
Yeah, and so they go, and the coach is like, yeah, for sure, yeah, you can. He takes them to the film room. At first, he's like, oh, what? But they chat a little bit, and then he's like, okay, yeah. And he takes them to this room full of film. He's like, look whatever you want, just like put it all back. Let me know when you're done. And also next door we have a whole spread for lunch that you guys can have.
Well, and then he says, and if you need any copies made of anything, just ask Kitty or whatever her name is, the
Yeah,
secretary, I guess, and she'll make copies for you.
yeah, they're incredibly generous. And then even more when we see some players come in to watch film, and the coach comes and grabs them, but we see their helmets. They have their WVU helmets, but on the back they have like a big like Marshall sticker, a little cross with MU on the back of their helmet. So
This that was a very touching moment for me, by the way, because I remember there were a lot of schools particularly in West Virginia, but a lot of schools across the country did the same thing. To remember Marshall and the football team. So it was, I remember seeing this in the movie for the first time. And I have to admit, I got a little teary eyed when I saw
yeah, no, I think that's one of the most moving things. And the coach is just like Bobby Bowden. Is that
Bowden. Yeah.
Bowden is like, well, yeah, of course, like we're like with you basically, and
Yeah. I was going to say, that even though we were rivals, it was still, we were still the two universities in the state.
right,
So,
we're like human,
yeah. Well, and
Um,
we're West Virginia,
yeah,
so that was
exactly.
mm-hmm.
But yeah,
So,
and Jack Lingle is like that's like super classy of you to
yeah.
do that. So
Yeah.
they have to once again. It's like Jack Lingle's like, hey, why don't we try this crazy thing? And it worked out. Um, so take that as a lesson, everybody. Just a thing that seems crazy, why not give it a try?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Meanwhile, back in Marshall, as I mentioned, Reggie has had this case of beer since the night that happened. And then he's got all these new roommates that are on the team, and someone opens it and cracks a beer. And clearly it was known not to do that because all the other guys
Oh, yeah. It was like,
look to Reggie like, oh God.
by the way, Reggie is the Reggie Oliver who's going to
Yes,
become the starting quarterback for
yes. Reggie
Marshall.
Oliver, real person.
Real person.
Um, Played by Arlen Escarpeta, he's been in a lot of things. He's currently on the show called Found. I first learned of him on the show American Dreams, which was a great show that
Oh,
used to come
okay.
on NBC around this time actually. It was about it's like people in the 60s and like a girl starts dancing on American Bandstand and like as they're navigating like the Vietnam War and like racism and all this stuff. It's a very good show. Look it up. Brittany
Okay.
Snow. Brittany Snow's the main girl. Her brother goes to Vietnam. Arlana
Oh,
Scarpeta is like
I've seen that. That
mm-hmm.
is a good show. Uh-huh.
Arlana
Yep.
Scarpeta is like there's like a black family I think that maybe like worked for the dad. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's like they are kind of friends, but also like it's like not really loud. So anyways, the guy plays Reggie. He's on that show. Watch American Dreams. Great show. So but yeah, it is this moment, right? Someone opens the box and cracks a beer who doesn't really know, but everybody else seems to know that like that's off limits. So everybody's kind of waiting for Reggie's reaction, and the kid who had cracked it open is like, "Oh, you want one?" and like tosses Reggie a beer, and there's a moment of like, "What?" And then he pops it open and starts drinking it. they've gotten burgers instead
Yeah.
too, so they're
Mm-hmm.
having beers and burgers, and then they start playing music and kind of like having a little party.
Vibing.
Yeah, and so it is. You could see it's sort of like a symbolic, like, okay, maybe we can take a step forward.
Right. We can let the past go, let this part go, and
Right.
then yeah, move forward.
Yeah, like he drank one of these beers and like nothing happened.
Right.
Right, like the walls didn't crumble down.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay. We can do this. And then you also see like Nate kind of outside. He's not taking part in the party, and he does not appear to be in the best of spirits. I think partially because, well, my assumption, how I read it, is like he's largely responsible for this football team coming back, and it's
Exactly. Yeah.
not going well.
Yeah. He doesn't see this as it's not, what I think what he anticipated, but Jack, like when they first introduced him, he told him, he said, if you're looking for miracles, don't look at me. I'm a football coach. And because if you are, you'll be disappointed, and I might be looking for a job. So he knew what task was ahead of him. And then, but yeah, I think Nate is, yeah, a little maybe bummed, or for whatever reason. So
He had some sort of fantasy of like this triumphant return, and
mm-hmm.
it's not happening.
At least
So
maybe not as quick as he had hoped or had expected.
yes, and well, then it's time for their first game, and we really
Mm,
see.
mm.
So it's their first game versus Morehead State.
Who we still play on the
Nice.
schedule, as well as East Carolina.
The team is bad.
Mm-hmm. It's not good.
Like Nate gets blown up. His shoulder had been hurt. He gets hurt again. It's their offense can't do anything. It's just they can't like put anything together.
No.
They were on the road, at least they're away. But everybody was bummed, and of course, I think there's this thought of like, well, should we have done this?
Exactly, and I think that's a thought, not only to the players but everybody. It's like, because we're now. I remember, people thought we're just embarrassing ourselves, and embarrassing the school.
Anyways, it goes bad, and I think the vibe is bad. But their next game is their first home game, so maybe there will be something there. Um, and I think you can see the bad vibe is not just everyone looking at the team, but it's on the team too, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the Reggie gets in a fight with another player because he's wearing the number of player who passed away, and he tosses his jersey on the ground, and he's like, dude, that is Joe Hood's number. Do not throw it on the ground. And the new player is like, it is my number now. I am on this
Mm-hmm.
team, and I will do whatever I want, kind of, and it becomes a big fight. With to some extent, I think they both have a point in that fight.
Yeah. Yeah. And then of course Nate gets involved.
Yeah, that I did write. There's lots of fighting. I guess Nate's shoulder is okay because he was in the fight.
Well, up until that point.
Yeah, it's like he got hurt in the game, and then it was fine enough to fight, but then he gets hurt again in the next game. Spoiler.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and Nate is being a real jerk, really, and Red calls him out. He's like, this isn't. I don't know like what designs you have, but like this isn't it. This is
Right.
not what's happening. Um, but Red also is like he's not doing good either because he thinks he's like, the team cannot win. We are disgracing their memory
Mm-hmm.
by doing this, which I think was like the fear too, right? That it was. I think people like Nate were like, oh, we're going to honor their memory by like playing and doing well, and now they're doing terrible. Which again, it is, to be fair, it has been only one game, with most people who had not played football before. It's like, oh no, we are actually like disgracing them.
Right.
Coach Jack Langle confronts Nate, who insists that his shoulder is fine. This scene was sad too. I think this was sort of like a moving scene. Because Jack is like, your shoulder is hurt. And he's like, my shoulder is fine. And he starts hitting him in that shoulder. And I think this is Anthony Mackie's like some of his best work. He's trying to hold it together. He keeps going, my shoulder's fine. And he's just like slowly like breaking down into tears. And then he eventually just it's like full sob. Because it's like his shoulder does hurt, but it's like not about his shoulder, right?
Exactly.
This is emotional.
It's his heartbreaking. I think
Yeah.
To me, it was, it wasn't just his shoulder. So the shoulder pain he could take.
Yeah. I think at this point, this is sort of, everybody's had their moment of like the like survivor's guilt. And I think this is sort of his moment coming to a head. Because like I said, he had this idea, we're going to put the football team together and we're going to like do well and we're going to like keep it going and like honor them and blah, blah, blah. And like, it is the opposite of that. And he's just like, what have I done?
Yeah.
kind of thing. So I think he's, and he feels like the team was left in his hands. So it's like his responsibility to like carry this team forward, and it's not working because he's failing in that.
Yeah, exactly. So, and like, and he's not the only one hurting, but you can see he is like the heart of the team, of what was left of the old team, and now the beginning of what they call the young thundering herd, which by the way is that's a real thing. That wasn't just something for the movie. That's what they were known as, was the young thundering herd, when they allowed them to start freshmen.
People turn on the president of the university now. Paul Griffin lets them know that the board has voted him out.
Yeah.
Because of the football program. And I think this is when he says, this is not about football. And like I said, I think this is a parallel to the conversation that they had before, where Paul tells the president they should not bring football back because it's just a reminder of what they lost. And the president here kind of says, like, you're talking about this as if it's the whole town, but really it's you, right? He's telling Paul, like, this is about your loss and you have to find a way to deal with it or nothing will get better. Whereas, like, obviously, like you said, there was split opinion amongst the town, but this guy Paul, who again is fake, he's a character, but he's presenting it as if he's only talking about how the town feels. But it's like, no, man, like, your wife had died a few years ago and now your son died. Obviously, this is like about how you feel, but you just won't say it.
Right.
So the president's like, listen, you can fire me, like, that's fine, but like, you still have to deal with this. Like, nothing's going to get better for you by me being fired. You have to deal with this. Like we said, this guy's like pushing away, pushing down the feelings. He's like, leave me alone.
It's almost like this sort of stereotypical, I think, adult male from almost the 50s. And I will tell people that's sort of how it felt growing up in West Virginia at the time. We always felt like, as I got older, I felt like we were always maybe a decade or so behind the rest of the country in how we dealt with things, how we accepted things, how things came into change, whether it was clothing or music or lifestyle or whatever it may be. It was always like we were still stuck in the 60s and maybe even the 50s while everybody was coming into the 70s. So, it was different. Now, as an aside, I will say they did nail the clothing. The wardrobe department did a great job. The wide ties and the plaids and everything, but this was the big thing. It was like the male of the family, the man at the head of the household or whatever, was quiet, and that men didn't cry, and and they didn't show their feelings. And my dad was like that to a certain degree. He really was. So, and I think most of the men that I grew up around at that time were the same way. Men in their 40s and 50s, who were of that age, they'd come out of that era, and then that's how you dealt with things. You bottled everything up inside, and you died of a heart attack at the age of 55. So
there's a joke that I always reference that I love from a comedian named John Mulaney, who I think he's from Chicago, so he's not like Appalachian, but I think his dad similar thing. He jokes, I keep all my emotions right here, and then one day I'll die right here, like in his chest, and then one
uh-huh.
day is the joke that he always used to use. Which I think is like, but yeah, it's like, and I mean, they're having this conversation like in the steel mill, like very sort of like I'm a tough, hardworking man kind of vibe. And then the hits for Paul keep coming. Like people are really knocking on his emotions because then Jack Langle comes to the diner
Uh-huh.
where Annie is, and he knows Annie's name. Uh, you can tell Jack Langle he's doing his research. Um, he greets Annie and he asks for a slice of pie. And the diner I think is a sort of, like I said, that's like kind of Paul's domain. So you can see when he comes in that it's like, oh, I don't know if this guy could come in here. Like the diner owner is like, we're like about to close.
Mm-hmm. Which I
Um,
find kind of odd too. That was the first time the coach had been in the diner, because that was supposedly the place to be. So,
yeah. The
um,
vibe was not that he didn't, it didn't seem like they were super, he was welcome there.
yeah, exactly. So, especially I guess after the first couple of games where they, just got
Yeah.
whipped.
So he comes in, and he goes to talk to Paul. He introduces himself and he says something about like, I think like you must have been really proud of your son. And Paul's like, nope, we are not talking about my son. You do not
Mm,
know him. Do not talk to me. And Jack's like, okay. And then Jack talks to Red Dawson, his assistant coach, who again at this point is kind of like, we shouldn't have done this sort of thing. And he talks to him. He's basically like, and I think also this is showing that Jack Langle is sort of getting it, because I think before he was like, I'm going to come in and we're going to win football games, and he's thinking of it from that perspective, and he's not really taking into account the like emotional turmoil that's bubbling here.
hmm
But he talks to Red Dawson, and I like this part too, because he's basically like, at some point we're just going to be a regular football team, and at that point all it's going to matter, because I think he said like when they talked earlier, Red Dawson was talking about the previous coach Polly, who was like all only cared about winning, and they're like, of course, like that's what you're supposed to care about as a coach. And simply right now, they don't have like the luxury of that. One day we will. Like one day we'll be a normal football team again, and like that's all that we can worry about. But like until then, we need like something.
hmm
This is more. It's more meaningful than that right now. I think is basically his thing. So they're trying to do some like, I don't know, kind of like emotional repair. Like,
Yeah. And I think that you said it. I think at this point in the movie too, you sort of like get the feeling that Jack gets it now.
yeah,
and then he realizes, maybe not to the extent, but he sort of realizes what's at stake here. It's not just the football team. It's the heart and soul of the city, of the town. So, um,
he's not going to come in there and turn them into like a bowl team immediately, but
yeah,
like we can still do something here.
right.
So, it's time for their first home game, and then this part reminded me of Remember the Titans too. Like where they're all out, everybody's outside of applauding outside of Coach Boone's house.
hmm
Um, he goes out front. Uh, he's like hanging out with his wife and like playing with his kid, and then they're like, "Hey, look out front!" And the entire town is like walking down the street to go to the stadium.
Yeah, go to Fairfield Stadium. So,
Yeah.
and that shot is seen that's seen as shot in Huntington as well. That's what we call Fraternity Row. It's Third Avenue. So,
Yeah. Just living on what is in real life Fraternity Row. That's kind of funny.
yeah, so
Um,
yeah, the house he comes out of is actually a fraternity house. So they spruced it up a lot, but I mean I recognize the house. So I won't say what fraternity it is, but
was it
yeah,
yours?
No, it wasn't mine. So no.
It would have
Actually,
been
my
cool if it was yours.
I know my fraternity house had been torn down by that time, so, and we'd lost our charter. So, but I was in a fraternity at Marshall University. So I was going to say trivial
Listen,
fact where they show a scene at Hodges Hall. You see the sign where he's walking with the president out of Hodges Hall. That's where we were when I accepted my invitation to join the fraternity. We were kept up upstairs, and then they called our name, and we would run downstairs out of Hodges Hall. So
if you want to learn more about Jim's fraternity life, listen to our episode on Animal House.
yes.
But
Anyway,
yeah. I don't when you said that wasn't your fraternity house, my mind went to another Matthew McConaughey movie quote when he was like, which doesn't fully grammatically make sense, but in Dazed and Confused when they I think he asked someone if they have drugs and they say no, and he said, be a lot cooler if you did. Um
exactly. So,
so anyways, before the game, we also cut to our fake people, Paul and Annie. And they go on a walk. She's actually supposed to be working at the diner. And Paul's like, well, no one's there because they're all at the game. So he's like, well, I don't think you're going to get in trouble if you leave. So they go for a walk, and he basically tells her to move on. See, if you remember earlier in the movie, he was like, you keep that ring on and you think of my son, Chris, every single day. But she and Chris had planned on graduation to go to California. And he's like, just go to California. And she was like, well, I can't like leave you alone here. And he's like, no, 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 no. Don't try to put it on me. You need to go. You got to live your life. So he's, you can tell he's finally starting to get it a little bit. Um, and you could see he had given her like a handkerchief, and she ends up giving him back the handkerchief and with the ring in it.
mm-hmm.
So he does finally agree to move forward because he's like, oh, I have a job, and he's like, you work at the diner. Well,
Yeah.
he says, well, guess what? You're not going to have a job when I tell them that you left the diner when you're supposed to be working. Um, so it's
Nothing like a little blackmail to get it some incentive to leave town.
right.
Yeah.
But she really needed to. He was like, don't stay here. You're like never gonna leave, basically. So you got to move forward. Because I think he realizes that he's kind of stuck in grief, and he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't want that for her. Even though at first he did, he was like, everybody should be sitting in this grief with me, kind of thing, which I think is a natural inclination. I think it's hard losing someone and feeling like your world is stopped and everybody else's keeps going.
Mm-hmm. So,
So like, why are you like doing that? It's like the world has been changed. Like, how do you not know? Kind of thing. Um,
can I interject one thing
yeah.
here, if you don't mind?
Mm-hmm.
So, this also was a personal moment for me because I remember what almost it was almost sort of the same speech my dad gave me when I was deciding what to do when I got out of school. When he told me, "Don't stay here." He goes, "There's nothing for you in West Virginia." He goes, "I want you to go out and find something else out there." He goes, don't be stuck here." And I took that to heart. So that moment meant a lot to me because, like I said, that was almost exactly the same thing my father told me when I was 20 years old. Basically to go somewhere else and find a better way or a better place.
Mm-hmm. Well, back to the game. The date is September 25th, 1971. Almost exactly. Uh, we're releasing this on September 23rd of
Mm-hmm.
2024. So almost exactly 53 years ago. Before the game, this also reminds me of Remember the Titans because sometimes you got to go on a field trip to give
Yep.
an impactful speech. So it's not Gettysburg, but they do go to the memorial site of several of the players who died, and they're ones I think that they couldn't find.
They couldn't
Like
identify
they
them,
couldn't
yeah,
identify
because
them.
yeah, they couldn't find enough of the remains to
Yeah.
find out who they were.
So he takes them there. Also, Red shows up too because it seemed like we were unclear if Red was going to stick around. But
Mm-hmm.
again, he does. He gives them his ear, and he gives a pep talk about heart, and playing with heart, and sort of this team being the heart of the town, and all of this, the sort of meaning of this. And I think what I appreciate that he says is like at the end of the game, we may not have, we play like that. At the end of the game, even if we don't have the most points on the scoreboard, we cannot be defeated. Like, we might not have the most points, so we might not, like, in a literal sense win the game, but like we can't be defeated. So I think he's finally getting and communicating to them that this is sort of beyond the like points on the board, X's and O's of football. This is, we have to like play with heart. And I think that it is fair. Like that first game, like they were just shocking. Like, and I don't think that you could say that they put their best foot forward in terms of effort. Right. Yeah. So he's like, you got to just leave it all out on the field. That's what makes it meaningful, basically. Even if you lose in a, you know, in the literal sense, it will be meaningful to us. It'll be meaningful to the town if we kind of really leave it all out on the field.
Yeah, show that extra effort, because he even mentioned it. He said that the players that were before you, they'll be watching you, and then, you know, every time that ball snaps, they're going to be watching to see how you perform or how you react, and you know that. Yeah, it was very moving, I thought.
I think like we are connected to these people, right? Like we are their legacy moving forward, and that's a responsibility, and we have to do something with that. We have to make that meaningful. So, and then it's time for the game. So, they're playing Xavier, and at the beginning they have Xavier has like I think they say an All-American tailback, and I think at the beginning of the game the defense is doing okay.
Yeah.
Offense still sucks. But the defense, they're making some tackles. Nate's shoulder is still bad, and the other team knows that he can't go to his right side, so they keep throwing there. But the defense holds them, and their soccer kicker makes a long field goal. Like, his name is Justin Tucker, and Marshall leads 3-0 going into halftime.
Yep.
So it's like, it's something. Again, that reminds me of like Little Giants when they're like, we gained a yard.
Oh yeah, I forgot. Yeah. We kicked the field goal. We got points on the board.
Exactly. Although they had points in the first game.
Yeah, I think they scored.
They scored like 6. I think
6. I think it was a touchdown.
Was it a touchdown, or did they score 2 field goals?
I can't remember. I can't remember if it was a touchdown and they didn't have a good kicker to kick the point after, or was it 2 field goals? I can't remember. I'll have to look that up. So,
anyways, this is also at halftime when Annie gives the ring back to Paul. But then in the second half again, Marshall's offense sucks. There's a fumble that Xavier recovers to score, but then Marshall scores a touchdown. But then Xavier scores again, and there's only 1 minute left, and they're up, I want to say 12-9.
12-9.
Or 13-9. 13, because they make the
second
extra point.
Yeah.
They're up 13-9 with 1 minute left, which is, it's a triumphant game, but how terrible must that be to watch? 13-9, goodness. Defensive battle, I guess.
We went to every game after that. I was going to tell you. So what, rain, shine, snow, or whatever it was, we went. You know, we had tickets to every home game. So we still, you know, we had the shirts and everything. So yeah, I remember that game.
You were at this one?
That's
exciting. So, well, they end up, you know, running some reverse whatever. They're working their way down. First of all, they're working their way down, not getting out of bounds though, which is stressful. And then finally they have like 1 play left. Red Dawson calls the play. It's whatever. I don't remember what it is. I think it has.
Yeah, I can't remember.
It's a screen. It's some kind of screen, and I remember like, what's his face? Reggie throws the ball like as he's being tackled. And it's caught in the end zone.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think the dude like gets tackled after he catches it, does a flip. But in any case, it's a touchdown. Marshall wins. So their first home game back in this like rebuilding season, they win on like a 1 minute drive at the end of the game. And it's just it erupts.
It's pandemonium.
Yeah, everyone is celebrating. Uh, Jack gives the game ball to President Deadman, and he's like, "Well, I'm not a player," and he's like, "But you are the most valuable," because they couldn't have had the team without him. First of all, bringing back football, and
Right.
then petitioning the NCAA, all of that stuff. So like, also he's on his way out at this point, so they're like, "Well,
Right.
thank you,
He's already
thanks for
lost his
everything."
job, right?
Yeah,
So,
they're like, "Well,
yes.
thanks for everything you did." Um,
Yeah.
I mean, he did put his neck out for them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Still
Very
remember
sort
that
of
was
the
a big
reason
thing.
he got fired because of football. So
Yeah.
um, I think it's fair for them to commend him. And we hear a little bit about the games going forward. The next game they lost like 66-6 or something.
Oh, the next years were, yeah, were just with that season and stuff. I think we
Yeah.
won 2 games that season.
Yeah, they only won one more besides this Xavier
Yeah.
game. Um, and then he left. Jack Langle left in 1974 with a
hmm
final record of 9-33. Then he became the athletic director at the Naval Academy.
Exactly. I was going to say he went on to have a very distinguished career, as
Mm-hmm.
far as in athletics and so on and so forth. So,
Um,
and Bobby Bowden, moved. Bobby Bowden was real. He went to,
mm-hmm.
I think he went to Florida, didn't he? Didn't he go to
He was
Florida
with
State? He
who?
he had a great reputation as a
Yes,
football coach.
Florida
So,
State. But yeah, so we get a little bit of you know where did they go after this? So um, President Debman went to Radford University. He stayed there until he retired. Um, what was the announcer's name? Dean what?
Gene Morehouse,
Okay, I wrote his son's name. The little boy is Keith Morehouse, and he actually then became the voice of
the
Marshall.
voice
And
of
I believe
Marshall,
at the time of this movie, he still was.
still was. I think Keith
I don't know that he is
retired
now.
a little bit. Yeah, not too long ago. I'm not sure. I don't think he does the announcing anymore.
Okay.
So,
But yeah, at
but
the time in 2006, he was
yep,
still
very
the
much
announcer.
so.
Reggie Oliver was the starting quarterback for the rest of his time there. He actually came back to coach for Marshall.
hmm
Um, Nate graduated and got married and moved away. He died in 2001, and they show he's buried in Huntington, like in the same cemetery as
He's with his
those other
teammates.
players.
hmm
Um, as we said, Red Dawson, he gave his 1 year and he never coached football again.
No.
He
By the
completed that
way,
season.
in the scene where at the end of the game where they won, and then
Mm-hmm.
Matthew Fox's character in the locker
Mm-hmm.
room, and then the guys picking up the towels.
Mm-hmm.
That's Red Dawson,
Oh wow, the real Red Dawson.
the real Red Dawson. He came back to Huntington to appear in the movie.
That's awesome. So yeah, I was gonna
Yeah.
say that's sort of one of the last shots of the movie is Red is in the locker room like crying, kind of
hmm
joyfully, right? It's a
Yeah.
cathartic relief. Um, and then his wife comes to get him, and he's like, "Oh, I couldn't leave," and she was like, "Yeah, nobody else could." And then all this a huge crowd on the field of people just kind of lingering at the
We didn't get
stadium.
home till late. We didn't stay real late, but I mean, we stayed after the game because people were talking in the stands and stuff. And it was just like,
Mm-hmm.
oh my God, here we won, our home game and all this. And I remember, Dad talking with his buddies and stuff because I was, what, 14 at the time, but, I had to wait for him to drive me home. So,
You want to like linger in that. You don't want
sure.
it to end that
Yeah.
like moment because it is a moment, and obviously like the rest of the season did not go as
Y-
well.
Yeah, I can't even remember. I don't remember the other game we won, but I do remember that ball game. Like I said,
Yeah,
we went to all the home games. So,
yeah. So I will say some other information that we get from Kate Mara's voiceover at the end. Marshall lost more games in the 70s than anyone else in the country.
So, boy,
Uh,
you talk about dedicated fans. Let me just tell you.
yeah,
So, and Lindsay will attest. I am a proud son of Marshall and a ardent supporter. So,
indeed.
rain or shine. So I've we've all suffered through the lean years. So yeah, but
Mm-hmm.
even still, it's still the herd. So
Yes, yes. I always appreciate loyalty. I was raised by a now the Washington Commanders fan.
Mm,
So,
mm,
you know,
mm.
loyalty and perseverance are values I was raised on.
That's big pluses in our book. You got
Yeah.
you had you lived and bled green. Just
Yeah.
saying. So
It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what the record is. Here we
that's right.
are.
Yeah, that's our team, baby. So.
Yeah. But the perseverance pays off. They had their first winning record in like 30 years or whatever in 1984, and
Mm-hmm.
since then, they've had a lot more success. Conference championship, bowl games. They moved from Division 1 2A to Division 1A, which is sort of like where all the big teams that we know of play. So, and they've been, I think, you know, not necessarily like Alabama, but definitely much better than
Oh
in the
yeah,
70s
yeah. Oh
consistently.
yeah, yeah. And we've had several, Pro Bowlers and Hall of Famers going to the NFL. Randy
Mhm.
Moss played for Marshall. Chad Pennington.
Byron Leftwich,
Oh, right, right, right. Who played for the Jets?
he played for the Jaguars, I think was
Yeah,
one
was
of
a
the teams he
quarterback.
played for. Yeah. Ahmad Bradshaw. Just think if you say Randy Moss, like
Mm-hmm.
those first four, like Randy Moss, Byron Leftwich, Chad Pennington, and Ahmad Bradshaw, I think are
Yeah,
pretty
pretty
truly like
common
Randy
names.
Randy Moss, like in and of
Yeah.
himself, I think gives some serious cred.
Mm-hmm. By the way, whose son plays running back for the Cincinnati Bengals now?
That's wild.
Yeah.
Um,
So I will say, like, again, personal, like every year that Marshall went to a bowl game or won a conference game, I have hats from all those titles and stuff. So
mm,
I've got a whole collection of Marshall hats where we went to all kinds of weirdo bowl games, and and whatever conference we were in at the time. If we won the conference championship, I always made sure I
right.
got the hat. So yeah.
Yeah, the Tito Finger Dust
uh,
Bowl and like
the
whatever.
Frito Lay chili dip bowl or the weed eater.
Equifax Credit Score Bowl and whatever
there's some
other
there's some yes,
even some obscure ones.
exactly. So yeah. And the other one of the things, a few years ago, Marshall came into Navy to play Navy at Navy. Jack Lingle, they honored Jack Lingle at that ball game. He
Right.
came back, and then by the way, Marshall beat Navy that day. So just
Woohoo.
yeah. So yes, but yeah. So Marshall, yeah, it turned out, later on they had success on the football field again, and then had some very good teams and very good players. And to this day, Marshall football is still a solid establishment in the community and in the state. So
You were saying that whenever you are like home for Thanksgiving or whatever, you
we
go to the
always
game.
go to it's the last home game after Thanksgiving. So whenever I visit my family, I still have a sister that lives there. So when we go visit, and then because they have season tickets. I told you she's married my brother-in-law who was at Marshall at the time of the crash. Is a member of the Big Green Club, and so yeah, we always go to the football game. So um, also what I said about the clothing, that they got it right. They also got the green of the Marshall uniform right at the time, because Marshall's changed shades of green several times. So they've kind of gone back to this light green that you see in the movie, but for a time period, or for a long period of time, we were like a real dark Kelly green. So don't ask me why, but we did. So, and now
Like
they're
the
bringing
like the
back,
old Eagles Kelly Green
yeah.
kind of thing.
And now they're some of the sporting goods stores, well, the in town, they've got the throwback logo now of that little buffalo,
Mm.
with the smoke coming out in a little like beanie cap on his head. They're using that again as a logo this year. So
Nice. I
yeah.
was gonna say I do love. We've talked about this. I love a '70s wardrobe, like the way that they styled Matthew McConaughey's hair in this movie too, and Matthew Fox's hair too, like
Mm-hmm.
very
Mm-hmm. Well,
'70s. Like he had the
well,
sort of like very close cut hair, but even just like the way that they styled it, that
oh,
like the
little
part.
that, and you could tell is either Vitalis or Brill Cream, that they had going
Mm-hmm.
through there. So, although I will say, with Matthew, with Jack Lingle, he wouldn't have had that scruffy beard thing. Guys didn't really have that except if they were younger. Now he was younger, but he wasn't like college age, so he would have been clean shaven. And I don't remember him ever looking like that.
Love his plaid, like the plaid pants though.
well, the president wears some of the best suits. Like
Mm-hmm.
he had a plaid suit on at one time with the big wide striped tie. So I mean, that was just these were all classics. So of course, my wife just rolls her eyes when she looks at that. But that's how we dressed back in the 70s.
Yeah,
We had the
yeah,
flared pants and we had the plaid suits and the striped wide ties. So
yeah. Men
yeah,
of today, what's stopping you from looking like that? Look more interesting,
yeah,
like people did in the 70s.
everybody looks the same. I think
Yeah. Oh, jeans and a t-shirt. Mm.
yeah, yeah, or everybody's got a pair of white sneakers. It's like show
Yeah.
some little
Have a
bit of
little,
style.
yeah,
Yeah,
have a point
something.
of view, please. And then the movie, it was directed by McG, who I think he used to direct music videos before he started movies, but I think his first big movie was Charlie's Angels with
Mm-hmm.
the one with Cameron Diaz and Drew Barrymore. He directed Terminator Salvation, This Means War, which I believe is the one with Reese Witherspoon and Chris Pine and Tom Hardy are like spies fighting over her.
Oh, okay. Now I remember which one. Yep.
Yes, he directed. There's a Netflix like comedy horror called The Babysitter that he did too. And he worked on helped create some big TV shows like The OC, which is a very personal favorite of mine,
Oh, okay.
Chuck, and Supernatural. The screenplay is by Jamie Linden, who also wrote the movie Dear John. That's the Nicholas Sparks movie with Channing Tatum and Amanda Seyfried. He wrote a movie called Money Monster, which I've never heard of. And he wrote and directed a movie called 10 Years. The most significant fact about him to me is that his current partner is Rachel McAdams, who
Oh,
we discussed in our Mean Girls episode,
yes.
Regina George. So yeah, they're together and they have a couple of kids. So that to me is his greatest accomplishment in life, besides this movie. Because some of the other ones, I'm like, what? But yeah, so that's kind of everybody involved. Just wanted to give a quick rundown. But yeah, I think that this I'd seen this before, but this was the first time I watched it all the way through in quite some time, and I think it is a reminder. I mean, I think that maybe critically it was not the most like well received movie in the world.
No, it wasn't. Yeah.
But I do think that there is like it's a moving film.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, when I saw it in the theater with like my dad and like all these other football coaches, like not a dry eye in the room.
It's a very moving, touching story, and then I think the fact that it's true.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, they didn't take a lot of dramatic license with the issues and so on. They just maybe put some characters together and so on, but for the most part, I would say a lot of the story is actually factual. So
Yeah, and I think they added those characters because they wanted to get not just like the sort of community football
hmm.
angle of it, but also like the personal angle of like people who lost someone, without necessarily like bothering a real person about it. But and I think that's one of the things that's appealing about it because I think it shows, like I said at the beginning, like it doesn't it's about football, but it's like not about football. And I think it's about grief and guilt, but it's on a personal level and on like the school level and on a community level. So like all these different levels of it and how that like manifests and how people deal with it or try not to deal with it.
Right.
And are forced
Yeah.
to deal with it. Um, kind of thing. And I think that's what's really compelling about it. And I think in that way, like Remember the Titans, which is like about football, but not really about football, I think it can be appealing to someone even if like football is not your thing.
Yeah, I would say I don't think you have to be a sports fan or a football fan or even a sports fan to watch the movie and maybe get something out of it. I think, if nothing else, if you watch it, for the like you said, the portrayal of a community and people that lose something close and very near and dear to them. And again, like I said, for me, it was it was very personal. So there were times when I was watching the movie, it be I remember it takes you right back to that time, even though that was a lot of years ago. But even still, it was just it was one of those things that stays with you for I guess the rest of my life anyway. So
Sure. Yeah, I mean that's still like a really significant event. Like that
mm,
doesn't
yeah,
happen
No, you go to any Marshall game, and like I said, it's to November the 14th, and that's usually around, like sometimes if we're there early or whatever, we'll go to the game. There's an anniversary game, and then and the crowd, we are Marshall, chance through. They show some of the movies sometimes on the big screen at the movie theater and during the ball games and stuff like that. So it's
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, it's just part of our heritage now, so.
Well, I appreciate you picking this sim, and I appreciate you sharing like your memories and experience of it, because I think that makes it, I can watch the movie, and like I said, I didn't know anything about this event before I watched the movie the first time. But hearing like from your perspective as someone who like, literally like heard the boom of the plane crashing like
Mm.
that, I think that just makes it all the more like real and like moving. Like obviously I know it's a real thing, but like
Yeah,
one
no,
thing to like think about it as a real thing, but then to like, hear you talk about it.
well, thank you, and I appreciate you. I know being a football movie and so on, and you watched all those with your dad and stuff. But I appreciate you, watching this one with me as well, and then enjoying your insight into it too. As someone, most of the people I'd seen the movie with, we all lived in Huntington, so it's nice to talk to someone, who gets a fresh perspective on the movie, coming from not coming from the hometown, but but you have a football background, with your dad and stuff. So it's nice to hear, how you felt about the movie. So maybe we'll pick up something a little more uplifting for our audience as we stay in football season. So
Yes.
yeah.
I think our next one's going to be a funny football movie is my plan.
Is it going to be the one where the Super Bowl? It's the plot to kill everybody in the Super Bowl at the time of I forget.
Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah.
Yes, Bane. That specifically. That we're just gonna
Oh
watch
no,
that
Black.
part.
I was Black Sunday. Where
Oh,
that was. I think it's from the '70s. But there's a terrorist that's going to blow up the Super Bowl, the L.A. stadium or something during the Super Bowl. So,
heard of that movie?
no. Oh, okay.
No, that's why I
Black.
thought you were talking about Bane.
No.
And he
I
doesn't
forgot.
Dark
Yeah,
Knight
with
Rises.
the Gotham Knights.
I believe so. He did also blow up the stadium.
Blow up the
So.
stadium. Yeah. So yeah, which made it a lot interesting, more interesting on some of the running plays.
Right. Can you stay on the part of the ground that exists?
Exactly. Yeah.
Uh,
What a great game show.
that would add a real different layer to. They can do that
Yeah.
in like the Pro Bowl game.
Yeah. As,
Um,
as Christopher Walken said in what the movie about the ping pong guy, he goes, "What part of sudden death did you not understand?"
mhm. But no, we'll go more funny for the
Okay.
next one.
So
Um, but yeah, well, anything else you want to add, Jim?
no, just if you do watch the movie, I appreciate any thoughts, if y'all want any feedback or anything, or if anybody was in Huntington at the time, if or had somebody who was going to school there, or if you knew anybody, please comment and let us know what your reaction to our take on the movie is. So
Ooh, I'd love to hear that. If you're a Huntington person, I have only driven through Huntington. Uh, looked
didn't take you
over.
very long.
No, you look over to the right from the highway, and there it is,
Exactly.
as you're
So
driving into Kentucky.
mm-hmm.
Well, thank you all for listening. Again, as Jim said, please leave a comment, share an experience, share thoughts you have. You can also rate and review us, especially if you are going to give us a good one. Please subscribe to this wherever you're listening to podcasts so you can get all of our next episodes that come out. You can also follow us on Instagram at Some of Our Parts Pod, just to get a sense of what we've talked about. I think we have a pretty diverse slate of movies we've discussed so far, and we'll continue on that trend going forward. You can also get little clues about what's coming next. We like to share that and anything else that comes up that's relevant. And with that, bye bye.
Take care.
Go Herd.